super breezy, cold winter afternoon today in Delhi, and we have two things to talk about, or maybe one and a half things to talk about. The first is on a global plane or a global geostrategic plane related to the key issue right now that's rocking the world. That's like Ukraine, Russia, Europe. Although the pivot on which this geostrategic world is rocking right now is a very tiny one. It's a very tiny nation called Qatar, because something very interesting has happened with Qatar over the past 36 hours. We'll talk about that in detail. And that is something, Qatar is something that we've talked about in the past. We had just mentioned Qatar in the context of the rising Russia Ukrainian tensions just about a week back, when we said that Germans, Europeans, but particularly Germans, are really nervous that if the balloon goes up in Ukraine, then Russia may stop their gas supplies, their energy supplies. तो मेरा क्या होगा उसके बाद में, right? So for that, there was some kind of an effort being made by the Americans, by Joe Biden, to get the Qataris to underwrite that contingency, saying that if Europe falls short of gas, then we will fill in, because Qatar has a lot of oil and gas, more gas than oil. And we had also mentioned that in that episode of Cut The Clutter, that it's no coincidence that around time the new German Chancellor is coming to the White House or to Washington. Around the same time, the Qatari ruler also is coming to Washington. Qatari ruler whose name is Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani. So that's been going on in Washington now. That's one. The other is something that we might mention sort of in the passing, and that is, but it's also important because we need to understand how complex our history and our heritage in the subcontinent is, and how cluttered our politics is. This is the issue of the so-called Jinnah Tower in the city of Guntur in Andhra Pradesh. So what's happening with Qatar just now? Now, you might remember that we had featured Qatar in a detailed Cut the Clutter about exactly a year back. That was episode 654. That's where we had talked about why Qatar is so important and what is it about Qatar's location, Qatar's resources, and Qatar's methods that's made it such an important country, although it's so tiny. Geographically, it is half the size of Israel, and Israel is a very small country. The first time I went to Israel, I also bought, like any other tourist, a t-shirt that says Israel, the smallest big country in the world. So this is half the size of the smallest big country in the world and has just 4% of Israel's population. So Israel's population is less than a crore. Qatar's native population is less than 4 lakhs. Native population, remember, not all the immigrants. It has a lot of Indians, Pakistanis, Bangladeshi, Sri Lankans, Filipinos, lots and lots, like many Gulf countries. But its native population is 4% of Israel's. But it's got a lot of money. How rich is Qatar? Its per capita income is little over $140,000 a year. How do we put it in perspective? Say it's more than twice as much as America's, right? It is 1.5 times as much as Switzerland's. For the longest time, in the times when we were growing up, it was widely presumed, that's before the oil boom, that Switzerland is the richest country in the world. But it is 1.5 times as rich as Switzerland. It's 40% richer than Singapore on per capita basis, and to the extent that it matters, it is 70 times richer on a per capita basis than India. So it's a very wealthy country. It's also a country which plays a very interesting game. It has the headquarters of the US Central Command. So the US cannot fight in the Gulf, in the Middle East, without that headquarters in Qatar. US Navy's headquarters for the Middle East is next door to Qatar in Manama in Bahrain. It's also some kind of a center for Iranian activity. Qatar has very good relationship with Iran. In fact, it also shares an island property with Iran in the Persian Gulf. It's not a tiny island property. It's 9,700 something square kilometers. It's almost as big as Qatar itself. And that island sits on top. That island is like a cap over one of the world's greatest storehouses of gas and energy. More gas than energy, but it has gas, but it also has oil bearing sedimentary rock. So much gas that Qatar's share of it, which is on the northern side, that adds up to about 18,000 trillion cubic feet, whereas Iran's share is about 6,000 trillion cubic feet. That Qatar now, as its sheikh has been visiting Washington just hours before his meeting with the President Biden, President Biden declared that he had notified the Congress that he was adding Qatar to America's list of major non NATO allies. Now, what major non NATO allies mean, what the status means, we'll talk about in a minute. But only 18 countries in the world have been given that status. So he gave Qatar that status. In the Middle East, Qatar now becomes a second such country. That is, first being Kuwait. Now, America has many bilateral security deals with many countries, including, say, with Israel. So, what does it mean to be a major non NATO ally? We will explain that to you, but we also have to see how many countries have it. I mentioned to you about 18 countries have it, and in the Middle East, Kuwait and Bahrain have it. But it's also true that Americans have a lot of bilateral security treaties with many other countries. Being a major non-NATO ally does not mean that if you come under attack from somebody, from an external power, America is treaty bound to come to your defense. If that were the case, America would have come to the defense of Pakistan actively so many times, and it's fracas with India, because Pakistan also happens to be America's major non-NATO ally. Surprise, surprise, yes, but it's there. So once again, you can say that that status can mean anything. That status can mean something if you are one thing if you are Australia, but quite another if you are Pakistan. In fact, Afghanistan also continues to be a major non-NATO ally. That obviously was done when the Ghani government was there, or a government that America recognized was there. They don't recognize the Taliban government. So that is a technicality. But the fact is that the countries in this list are very interesting. So these are Australia, Egypt, Israel, Japan, South Korea. Now, with all these, you can see that Americans have other mutual security arrangements: New Zealand, Thailand, Kuwait, and so on. But there are many others. Philippines also, the Americans have special responsibilities there. But look at Argentina, Tunisia, Afghanistan, Bahrain, Morocco, Pakistan, Jordan, etc. So Qatar now gets added there. This is a symbolic thing for the Americans to say, look, आप भी हमारे साथ हो. You are also a camp follower, and just because you are friends with Iran, we are not particularly out there to blackball you or to be suspicious of you. And just because you've had a fraught relationship with your other Arab neighbors who we are friendly with, America is friendly with, that is Saudi Arabia and UAE, it doesn't matter that we don't need you. Now, how does that happen? How does a tiny country like Qatar, whatever its economic power, how does it manage to punch so far above its weight? It's really a flyweight boxer punching in the super heavyweight class and holding his or her own. How does that happen? So for that, I would say, if you look at everything on Qatar, Qatar has three big assets. The first big asset is its geostrategic location. It is sitting astride the Persian Gulf, a modernizing rich country on top of the Persian Gulf, sharing land borders with the most important Arab countries, with a largely Sunni population, but having a very cordial relationship with Iran, at the same time having cordial relationships with many other countries in the world. So that is the first thing. It's geostrategic location, because it is that location which makes it so indispensable for America to base its central command headquarters there, because this is close enough to Iran, to Iraq, to Turkey, everywhere. The second thing is, very importantly, that it has also resources which give it geostrategic power. And these resources are mainly oil and gas. We told you about this 18,000 trillion cubic feet sitting under this North Dome area of this island. what is called as Nordom area. But there is plenty else oil and gas, and Qatar has invested very wisely. So they've become a big economic power because of this, because they invest wisely not just by way of enhancing their money, enhancing their wealth, that they are doing very well, but also by way of buying goodwill. So they are using this money also to buy a lot of goodwill among the global western liberal intellectual communities. A lot of conferences take place in Qatar, and Qatar hosts them. Also, it's now hosting the FIFA World Cup. So again, it becomes a soft power using this big money power. You can imagine a small place like that hosting an entire football World Cup. Also, it dispenses quite a bit of funds, scholarships, also to journalists, besides the fact that it now runs this global media powerhouse called Al Jazeera, which has the full freedom to cover all of the rest of the world, including particularly the rest of the Islamic world, as fairly as it wishes, as long as it stays out of all Qataris' affairs. So these are the two big strengths. What is the third big strength that Qatar has? The third big strength is just the diplomatic fleet-footedness and the open-mindedness of its rulers. They are great. They are great at diplomatic craft. They are also very open-minded. So they accommodate Iran. They also accommodate Osama bin Laden's family. They host them there. At the same time, they also host the US Central Command. At the same time, they play their little games in Syria and Libya as well, sometimes contrary to the rest of other Gulf Cooperation Council countries. They run afoul of other Gulf Cooperation Council countries. But once again, given their location and given how important they are to everybody, even GCC has now gone ahead and lifted its sanctions on Qatar. That's what makes Qatar so much more important and so much more significant. Now, what does this status do for Qatar? It gives them diplomatic prestige, right? How much prestige it is, again, depends on who you are and where you are located and what your stars are like at this point. With this diplomatic prestige has not brought that phone call from Joe Biden to Imran Khan as yet, although Pakistan continues to be major non-NATO ally. It also brings some military training in, but I don't think the Qataris need to bother very much about military training and all, because US Central Command is sitting there, so they are for all practical purposes military allies. You can give it whatever name you want, NATO or non-NATO. The best I can do is maybe use that line for Gulzar, प्यार को प्यार ही रहने दो कोई नाम ना दो, because this is a very tight relationship. So Qataris with these three assets: one, their geostrategic location; second, their geostrategic resources underground; and third, with their skills and their ability to invest their money, not just financially but also strategically. With all that, Qataris have now risen to be this preeminent force, not just in the Middle East, but at that point in the middle of, as the pivot of what is the main issue, the one big issue rocking global politics right now. That is the crisis in Europe. Because you know what? In many ways, Europeans are also lazy. They are not lazy when it comes to work. Now, I will not be so stupid as to call Europeans lazy when it comes to their work ethic or efficiency. They are super efficient. They have great work ethic. They are very competitive on all those parameters. In fact, you will have to be either nuts to be calling, say, Germans inefficient or lazy, or you've never flown Lufthansa, because Lufthansa, if you fly, sometimes it would look like even before you've bitten into your meal, trays are beginning to get cleared because they are so super efficient. But they are lazy about their security. And that is something Donald Trump used to complain about and used to keep threatening to send bills to them, saying that for so many decades, we Americans are underwriting your security. Now, some of that's happening again in Europe, because the message from Europe to America seems to be that, look, we are all afraid of Russia. We don't want Russia to be doing anything in Ukraine, but we also don't want to go and take panga with Russia, because besides other things, besides the fact that our armies are not ready, besides all that, we are dependent on Russian energy, Russian oil and gas, more gas than oil. And for Germany, this becomes particularly worse because, unlike, say, a country like France, which still has more than 70% of its energy coming out of nuclear plants, the Germans, out of sheer political correctness and also because Angela Merkel at one point had to buy some popularity with the Greens, they've shut down their nuclear energy plants. So Americans are now working with Qatar to get Qatar to underwrite Europe's energy needs. Suppose the balloon goes up in Europe. Now, Qataris also are playing hardball. They are saying, okay, we might give it to Europe, but on the commitment, Europeans have to give a firm commitment that this gas will remain in Europe. So I try to understand what that means. What that means is that price in Europe for gas is 4.5 times as much as the price in America right now. In America, it's about $7 million per million British thermal unit. That is the scale on which gas is measured. In Europe right now, it's 30. So Qataris are now worried that we might give it to Europe for strategic reasons because Americans are asking us to do so. It's a deal, but we don't want traders in Europe then picking up this gas and selling it elsewhere at a profit. So that is what explains to you this situation. Once again, resources, oil, money, location. All these add up to a country's strategic power. Now, that said, what is happening in Guntur? Now, Guntur is one of those typical this happens only in India story. Now, this is a tower that's been there maybe since 1940, 42, 41. Nobody exactly even knows when this was built. It was called Jinnah Tower, and thereby lies a story. Now, there are many stories because some of it is oral history, but the most credible thing we found is something that our Hyderabad correspondent Rishika Sadam, who covers both states, Telangana and Andhra, in the strength of one woman, one young woman, she found out that this is where lies a legend that in late 30s, early 40s, there was a riot near Guntur. Now, we don't know whether it was a communal riot or not. Possibly it wasn't. And I will tell you why. There was a riot after which 14 persons were given death sentence by British courts. Now, all 14 happened to be Muslim. That is when a local Muslim leader, whose name was Lala Jan Basha, he wrote to Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who was one of the foremost lawyers in Bombay, to say that, look, these 14 are going to be hanged, can you help them? So Jinnah didn't come himself, but Jinnah got his legal practice involved, and these 14 had their death sentence reduced to life imprisonment. It was to thank him for that Lal Jan Basha built this little tower and called it Jinnah Tower. It also seems that when this was inaugurated, Jinnah himself wasn't able to come, but among the people who attended were a whole bunch of freedom fighters of the area, including many of the prominent freedom fighters of the region who happened to be Hindus as well. So it wasn't really a Hindu-Muslim thing. And in fact, for a long time, and people have said, and YSR CP government is also saying this, that look, this is Jinnah Tower on Mahatma Gandhi Road, also an area with a mixed population. So it maybe is a good tribute to the fact that freedom movement, until the two-nation theory came in, was a secular movement. Jinnah was also a part of that movement. The BJP, on the other hand, wants it renamed. They want it renamed after APJ Kalam, as they did with Aurangzeb Road in Delhi. But once again, YSRCP reminds them, and read this story from Rishika, I'll share a link with you. YSRCP reminds the BJP that you've been in power in Andhra more than once in partnership with TDP. In fact, on one of those occasions, your minister, Manikyala Rao, also had the charge of endowments under him, which means all religious type of institutions. So if he wanted, or if your party wanted, you could have changed the name when you were in power. Now, just because you are down and out and you don't have any ally in Andhra Pradesh, you are picking up a fake issue. Either way, it's important for us to understand these things because we in the subcontinent have a very complex history and a very cluttered heritage.